Hello and welcome to Filling the Sink, a podcast from Catalan News. My name's Beth Cohen and today we'll be talking about Catalan literature. Sant Jordi is a Catalan cultural celebration which is held every year on the 23rd of April. And this week's podcast is actually being published a few days early to coincide. It's similar to Valentine's Day and served as the inspiration for World Book Day. Couples, friends and family give each other gifts of roses and books, commemorating the legendary slaying of the dragon by Sant Jordi, or St. George in English. In this week's podcast, we're taking advantage of the occasion to connect with Catalan literature and find out more about its translation into English. Joining me in the studio today is Cillian Shields. Hello, Cillian.
Hey, Beth. Happy Sant Jordi.
Bona dia de Sant Jordi to you too.
Feliz Sant Jordi. Today's a very special day in Catalonia. Like you mentioned, we're publishing this a little bit ahead of the normal Saturday schedule. And that's because today is a day to be out and about on the streets. If any listener has the pleasure of listening to this early in the morning, and if you still can, get out onto the streets, enjoy the festive atmosphere where you'll find in Barcelona hundreds really of bookstores, flower sellers, and it's just, it's always one of the best days to be out and about in any major town or city really across Catalonia.
But Cillian, why books? I mean, I know that roses are supposed to represent the blood of the dragon, but why are books relevant?
Yeah, so this is a tradition that started about 100 years ago. So the Barcelona Book Chamber started an event in 1926 where they just wanted to sell more books, basically. And so the first Spanish Book Festival was held in 1926, but not on April 23rd, but rather on October 7th. And then fast forward a few years to the 1929 Barcelona International Exposition. That is when street selling became a huge thing, really. That's when the booksellers decided to set up stalls on the street, very similar to how we see it now. And ever since then, the tradition has stuck. It's just been such a huge success. They've been selling so many books, but also the public have just really enjoyed browsing on the street. And also in and around that time, it was changed from the original October date to the now April 23rd Sant Jordi date.
And so really it was conceived as a marketing strategy. That's curious. Is it still a good moment for publishing houses and bookshops to make money? Or are people buying their books secondhand or using the library instead these days?
No, it's a hugely important day, not just day, really, week, because a lot of people will buy their book that they're going to gift in advance, so they're ready from minute one. But yeah, like last year, for example, 2024, more than €25 million was spent across Catalonia on nearly 2 million books. Sant Jordi Day typically contributes between 8 and 10% of a bookshop's total annual revenue. Like, it's a big deal, really, for the bookshops.
And who are the top Catalan authors that are being translated into English at the moment?
Yeah, so for this, I got in touch with the Institut Ramon Llull, a cultural institution here in Catalonia. So many thanks to Cristina Estrada for the information. And she told me that among the current authors, those who have had the greatest impact, especially in the United Kingdom, have been Eva Baltasar and Irene Solà. So Eva Baltasar has published recently, in the past few years, her triptych, her work containing 3 different books, which don't tell the same story, but they are connected in some sort of way. Those are Permafrost, Boulder, and Mammut. And those books have received really good reviews. She's been invited to participate twice in the Edinburgh International Book Festival. And in 2023, her work Boulder was even one of the 5 finalists for the International Booker Prize. For her part, Irene Solà has published in English the novels When I Sing, Mountains Dance and I Gave You Eyes and You Look Towards Darkness. That is coming later this year, as well as the poetry collection Beast. And they have received really enthusiastic, positive reviews from really prominent British authors such as Max Porter and Ali Smith.
So obviously the role of translators is key in the process of internationalisation of any literature. Cillian, do you have any stats on the number of Catalan works that are being translated into English?
Yeah, we have a few. We know that in 2022, that was the nadir in recent times of translations into English with 36 titles. It has gone down a little bit since then, with 17 the following year and then 19 in 2024. And so far this year, only 2. But listen, it's early. We're still getting there.
So there's a constant flow of works being translated from Catalan into English for the global market. Cillian, who are the most prestigious professionals in the case of translations from Catalan to English?
Well, I'd say one of the most prominent is Mara Fay Letham. She's been the translator for Irene Solá and Paul Wash, among others, as well as the very prolific Julia Sanchez. She's done so many. She's the translator of Eva Baltasar, Montserrat Roig. And apart from that, I've had the absolute pleasure, really, of chatting in the past couple of weeks with two. Peter Bush, for one, who has previously been awarded a Creu de Sant Jordi, which is the Catalan government's highest civil distinction, for his efforts in bringing Catalan literature to the Anglophone world, as well as Laura McGloughlin, who has previously served as the translator-in-residence at the British Centre for Literary Translation, and she has brought many of the most cutting-edge contemporary Catalan writers to English readers.
Cillian, you interviewed Laura McGloughlin and Peter Bush and started by asking what it means to them to translate a novel. Let's have a listen.
Translating a novel is reading and rereading a novel several times, interpreting it, but that rereading goes hand in hand with rewriting. So there's a kind of a really original, I think, relationship between reading and writing in the act of translation. I think that's unique.
I suppose for me, translation is a form of creative writing, in a sense. I suppose it's like you're the closest reader of a novel, because you're looking at the novel in terms of, as we all read novels, to be entertained or amused or informed, but also looking at the kind of the nuts and bolts of the language and the structures and how they've achieved that.
It's not a kind of matter of looking in a dictionary and finding kind of word-for-word equivalents, because what you've got to do is refashion the style, and that's extremely kind of difficult. It involves making hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of choices.
And I suppose my ambition when I translate a novel is to reproduce the effect that novel has on a reader of Catalan or Spanish or whatever language, and recreate that effect for an English language reader. That's what I try to do, recreate the voice. And it just means that in terms of being open to things like sarcasm or, but you're looking for the same effect that has on a Catalan reader.
One core element of the job of a translator is identifying and then refashioning the style of the original author.
It's not a mirror image. It's something that is developing out of what might be a lot of chaos. A lot of chaos in the sense that you're kind of taking these words by another writer and you're rethinking them, you're refashioning them. And this refashioning includes not only re-editing and drafting, but also all kinds of research. You might have to research some political references or cultural references. You might have to research the writer himself and what he was doing, what he was thinking about, what phase of his life he was writing this book. So that all of that goes into a kind of magma in your brain. And it's partly a conscious process, but partly an unconscious process.
I mean, this is a bugbear of mine, but a lot of the time someone will read something and they'll trip over it and say, oh, this was really bad translation, or this is not a good. And it's like, but the author wanted you to trip over that. The author wanted it to be weird. And you're blaming the translation, but that might be an effect that the writer has chosen.
And as I said, it's not a question of word-for-word equivalence. It's a question of finding a rhythm, a music that works in English as a way that the style of the original writer works in Catalan.
When learning another language, the mechanisms of your own native language become clearer, as you're able to make comparisons and contrasts with the other.
For instance, I translated un film, 3,000 metres, by Victor Catalan. It was published a couple of years ago in the States. And when I read it, I thought, how can I translate this? You often, when you first read it, you think, well, this is a work that's kind of impossible to translate. But then when you get started on the first draft, you begin to see ways of doing it. I don't know if you know the novel, but it was written after the end of the First World War. And it's kind of set in Barcelona. She's thought of as being a kind of rural novelist, but that is not true. She wrote this novel is a remarkable novel of Barcelona and a novel of the criminal world in Barcelona.
You're never going to do exactly the same things, and there's always going to be limitations of English. It's not even limitations. Mm-hmm. I would say constraints, that there's constraints between languages, that they're set up differently. The languages are so different. that there are certain nuances that you're not going to replicate in English because they don't exist or that the language is constructed differently. But it's not necessarily a loss, or it maybe is a loss in that it's not exactly the same, but there's a gain elsewhere, that the language in English is more open to these things and it's a bit more fluid and flexible in this.
Both Peter and Laura also feel that it's important to have an intimate knowledge of the society and culture whose language they're translating from.
Basically, I come to Catalan not in the same way. I don't approach it with a kind of a detailed knowledge either of the language or the culture that I have in terms of French and Spanish. So when I probably use the dictionary more to look up words and I do more kind of cultural historical research, and I'm always learning, which I don't feel that I have to do as profoundly when I'm translating Spanish or French. I obviously have a relationship with, the kind of history and the culture, and I know that in depth. When I was a student, I was a kind of radical student in 1968. I befriended a Catalan in Oxford, who was a Marxist, and I was involved with him in setting up a kind of political group in Barcelona. And so I kind of visited Barcelona in sort of 69 and 70 and gave talks, or was in discussions with intellectuals and workers about kind of revolution and Marxism and all that stuff. All that kind of experience is lived experience of the culture and the politics, which helps kind of, I've translated La Plaza del Diamant, In Certa Gloria, Al Vent de la Nit, these major works of the Spanish Civil War, so that when I was, for instance, translating In Certa Gloria, I don't know if you know the novel, but there are those pages early on in the novel where the protagonists are basically radical students in the 1930-31 in Barcelona, and they're meeting in the basement of a bar in the middle of near the Plaza de la Universitat, and they're talking about revolution and all of that. And when I read those pages, it kind of took me back to 1968. Really, they were very kind of similar kinds of discussions, and I even thought whether Joan Salles had any thought of the contemporary when he was kind of writing that novel set in the Civil War.
I would always say I think it's important for you to have a local understanding, but there's going to be things and certain references, even very oblique, to the cultural and political landscape, and that maybe we're more alive to as Irish people in terms of just the ideas, whether you agree or not agree, but don't agree, but the ideas of self-determination and just the kind of political nature of language and all of those things, that there are nuances that maybe you don't necessarily have. There's some amount of it plays on where you come from. It's a kind of a two-way thing. It's like, I'm also bringing something, I'm seeing something as important because I'm an Irish person, and there are certain parallels. I don't think they're totally equivalent, but there are certain parallels between the political landscape of Ireland and Spain at different stages. And I'm alive to those things where maybe a translator from a different place wouldn't necessarily see that as important, but might see something else. You know what I mean? So it's a two-way thing.
For Peter Bush, translating titles can sometimes be a straightforward task. 40 anys perduts, 40 years lost. Incerta gloria, uncertain glory. But, he says, they're not always so easy.
An interesting one is La Plaza del Diamant, because mine is the third translation of La Plaza del Diamant. And mine was the first translation by Cillian Shields, was The Pigeon Girl. And the second by David Rosenthal was The Time of the Doves. And I wanted to call it Diamond Square. So that might seem like a very straightforward decision. But my publisher didn't like the idea of Diamond Square. They said that there are no diamond squares in London. I mean, people can't connect with it. So I said, why not? And eventually, we made it in Diamond Square.
Why were you so adamant to use the name of the place in the book, like going against two previous examples that came before you? Why were you so adamant to go for it, and your publishers initially fighting against it? How did that conversation go?
I'd lived in Barcelona for 10 years. I knew La Plaza del Diamant. I'd often had coffee there, and I know Gracia very well. And I thought, why not call it Diamond Square? And the interesting thing is that Time of the Doves by David Rosenthal's title is a very symbolic kind of title, because doves is very symbolic of peace and so on. And I think that what David Rosenthal's take on the novel was that he wanted to see it as a novel of reconciliation in a way, and using the word dove rather than pigeon throughout the novel was also part of that. And I kind of don't agree with that kind of interpretation of the novel. I don't think it's a novel of reconciliation. I think at the end, Colometa is somebody who has had a very difficult life. Her life is partly resolved. She's got a husband, but the husband is war wounded. I don't think it's all a happy kind of, in a way, she's got kind of issues of thinking and mental issues because of her experience in the war. She kind of sits on park benches and talks to the women like a bag lady almost. So I wanted it to be pigeons and not doves, but I also wanted it to be Diamond Square.
Yeah, kind of to give us the tragic gloss, I suppose, that the story really is.
Another title is La Vida Amarga, the wonderful short stories by Pla. Obviously, La Vida Amarga can be translated two ways: bitter life or life in bitters. It can be an adjective or it can be a verb. La Vida Amarga. And I wanted to call it Life in Bitters because I think that's what happened. That those short stories are remarkable stories by Pla. I think it's one of the best books he's written. It's his experience in Europe during the 1920s, which he kind of transforms into stories that start in Catalonia and in Madrid, but end up in Berlin, based on his experiences there during the Weimar Republic. So, the whole move in that book, in the short stories, is one of embitterment. And so that's why I wanted to call it Life in Bitters.
While Peter has translated works from many legendary historical figures, Laura has been able to foster close relationships with many living authors whose work she has translated.
It can be different. It depends as well on your relationship with the author. And I've had different relationships. Sometimes I've been too nervous. At the beginning of my career, I was very nervous about speaking to the author because I was like, oh God, are they going to think I'm making mistakes? Or if I'm asking questions, are they stupid questions, And in general, authors are not like that. They're really happy for their work to be translated. That's what I try to do, is recreate the voice. And it just means that in terms of being open to things like sarcasm or, you're looking for the same effect that has on a Catalan reader. The closest relationships I've had in terms of work have been Flavia Company. I've done 2 books by her, but she was very available to me in terms of asking questions. So it's really useful because there'll be sometimes where, for me, one of the things I find challenging still, and this is in Spanish as well, is that sometimes it's not clear whether you're referring to I or you're referring to the first person or the third person. It looks the same. And obviously for the context, for Catalan and Spanish people, it's really obvious. It's like, well, that means this. And I'm like, but it's not obvious to me.
Laura has also translated 4 books of Bel Olid, a writer who has also translated many works into Catalan.
There was an amazing experience 3 years ago where I was doing 2 books by Bel at the same time. Sometimes you hear echoes that the author doesn't necessarily agree with. And so one of Bel's short stories, it's in Vents Més Salvatges was the Catalan book. And in my translation, it was Wilder Winds. And one of the short stories is entitled, in Catalan, Extàtica. I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I'm going to translate that as ecstatic, but ecstatic with parenthesis around the EC. So it's like the main character is ecstatic, but also it's about static because there's a reference to a TV, like static on a TV. So I was like, oh yeah, that'll be brilliant. That looks so amazing. And the publisher was like, yeah, that's amazing. And Bel was like, no, that's not what I meant.
Peter Bush celebrates the new voices coming to the fore in contemporary Catalan literature, branching out into new directions and growing richer with new modern perspectives.
Well, I think that there's a greater range of work being published now in Catalan. For instance, like the work of Eva Baltasar would have been unthinkable years ago. And I think that you've got writers like Gemma Ruiz, who kind of write novels with a very political and feminist kind of slant to them. And also writing about, she has the novel Catalunya, which she set in a Chinese hairdresser's in Barcelona. She has Argelagues, which is about the kind of working class in the countryside at an earlier stage. But there was this tendency, I think, for Catalan literature to be kind of a bit inward-looking, in the sense that it was an elite looking at itself and not wanting to encompass the experiences of the broader population. And I think that's what has changed. There's a variety that never existed before. And of course, Kim Munzo and Sergio Pamias also in their way broadened out the perspective of Catalan. But there was a kind of very elite view of Catalan literature that tended to want to write novels that were focused on the Middle Ages or the past, the remote past, and to write in a Catalan that was very flowery and used vos all the time. I mean, in a way that nobody kind of uses anymore. And also you have writers like Najat al-Hashmi. Najat's work is very striking because really there in Najat's writing you have the voice of individuals who come from, the creation of the world of the Catalan Moroccan, if you like. Those that have moved haven't been forced to kind of leave Morocco for economic or whatever reasons, and then become part of Catalan society. And she kind of really voices that, I think, and particularly novels like Mare de Llet i Mel, which is the novel of a mother who is from the Rift Valley, who is illiterate, who obviously doesn't speak Catalan, but the novel is from her point of view. So it's as if the Catalan is voicing the thoughts and the feelings of this mother.
Catalonia's position in Europe and within Spain has profoundly shaped the history of the language and its literature, Laura says.
It has been put in a position of defending itself against a dominant language like Spanish, where it had this huge history of literature, and therefore has had to be even more creative, more diverse, more enriched, has taken from other countries and enriched its own language because of that. Like when you see the kind of things that were translated into Catalan, like Ulysses and all these kind of things, like decades ago. And it was because they were taking from other languages and kind of saying, right, well, look, we're a language, we can stand on the world stage and we can compete in the same way.
Thank you to Laura McGloughlin and Peter Bush for making Catalan literature accessible to English-speaking readers, and of course for taking the time to share your thoughts and experience with us. Actually, some of my personal favourite Catalan novels are works which have been translated by them.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so I'm a fan of detective novels, and I really enjoyed El Verano de los Juguetes Muertos by Toni Hill, which was translated by Laura McGloughlin as The Summer of Dead Toys. It's actually written in Spanish, but Hill is a Catalan author, and the book's based in Barcelona and follows the story of Inspector Héctor Salgado. It's the first of a trilogy, so if you enjoyed that book, then there are 2 more to come afterwards. And I also enjoyed Pa Negra, Black Bread by Emili Teixidor, which served as an inspiration for the award-winning film of the same name and was translated into English by Peter Bush. And Cillian, what about you? Any personal recommendations?
Oh, well, I always love Carles Piñes's books. They always examine the intersection of sports and politics, which is an area of particular interest to me. So naturally enough, I loved Football in the Land of the Soviets. That was originally published in Catalan in 2019 and then in English in 2022. And I've also enjoyed other works by him, originally published in Catalan, such as Ultras, and another book on Sant Pauli Football Club. Then, I've actually taken upon myself to seek out translations of Catalan books to give as gifts to some people in my life. So in the past couple of years, I've given Irene Solàs When I Sing Mountains Dance, as well as Eba Baltasar's Permafrost, and they've been highly successful gifts, so I think I might be repeating that trick in the future. And as a little trick for any of the listeners here, or even yourself, Beth, because I've given those to people close to me, I can just ask for a lend of them myself so that when they're done with them, I'll also get the benefit and be able to read them. So everybody's a winner.
Self-gifting by proxy. You clever thing. That's almost all we have time for today. But before we go, it's time for our Catalan phrase of the week. Cillian, what do we have?
This week we've got a Catalan version of what was originally an Arabic proverb. We've got Un llibre es como un jardí que es porta a la butxaca.
A book is like a garden carried in your pocket.
Exactly, yeah.
Now you can also say a book's like a portable garden.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful image, isn't it?
And it refers to the fact that books are full of life and beautiful details, just like a garden, but they're small enough to keep with you wherever you go. This week on Filling the Sink, we've been talking about Catalan literature. Thank you to Laura McGloughlin and Peter Bush for taking the time to talk to us and share your experiences. And of course, thank you to Cillian Shields for joining me here in the studio.
Thanks very much for having me, Beth, and go out and enjoy the day.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to Filling the Sink wherever you get your podcasts if you haven't done so already. This podcast is being published on a Wednesday, so this Saturday there won't be another new episode. We'll be back again the following Saturday, the 3rd of May, with another exciting episode of Filling the Sink. On behalf of all the team here at Catalan News, I'm Beth Cohen, wishing you a great weekend and a feliç Sant Jordi. Fins aviat. Adeu.